like most of us, you're probably inundated with so much content about Charlie Kirk, but at the same time, you're wondering what's the proper conspiracy theory etiquette. Ramasani, how you do? So, of course, some of you may have heard that it's not proper to talk about politics in a social gathering, or not proper to talk about conspiracy theories, but you're at a cocktail party, and guess what? People are talking about Charlie Kirk because it's all over the news. So you're probably wondering what's proper and what's not. Of course, your traditional etiquette coaches will tell you don't talk about politics, religion, physical intimacy, disease, and so on and so forth during dinner and cocktail parties. But guess what? You're at a cocktail party or you're at a date. And what does your date talk about, or what do you have? Politics, economics, and so on. And if you're saying I'm apolitical, you come across as a dumb bimb. Right? So you want to say something, but you don't want to say the wrong thing. So what do you do? You want to sound intelligent, but at the same time, gentlemen don't appreciate that it's a high-risk situation, right? It's so high risk. So, because if you talk politics and you say the wrong thing, they have the wrong impression, and then you're out of society, right? You say the wrong thing to the wrong person, right? You know, it's a social unaliving, right? If you say the wrong thing, so, oh, what do you say, right? But if you say nothing, oh, I don't know, oh, she's stupid, she's not wife material, I don't want that thing raising my children because she doesn't have an education. You know, it's so difficult, right? Because if you're not elite, you don't know what you can say, what you cannot say. So here I am to guide you. Of course, for more, you can book sessions with me if it's anything specific, but I will give you the basics, ladies. So when it comes to conspiracy theories, what is proper and what's not? Well, that depends on the country you're in, right? Because let's talk about Epstein Island, for example.
Jeffrey Epstein has no client list, but I ran an escort agency for 5 years. During one of those years, I actually kept track of my clients, and my list is over 10,000 names. When I was arrested, the prosecutors wanted my list. I told them they could have it if they went after the men the same way they went after me, which was to take all of their money and arrest them by an armed SWAT team. And guess what? They didn't want my list. They just wanted to cover up who was on there so it never got out to the public. The same way with Jeffrey Epstein's list. We will never know who's on there. It's a cover-up.
So, as you can see by that madame, you know, who owned an escort agency, that there was a conspiracy, and it was real. Her clients did really go to her. Many of them married gentlemen. So, you know, they really did what they did, right? And saying people are crazy to be conspiracy theorists is simply an elite form of gaslighting, gatekeeping to maintain their power. So if you speak of a conspiracy theory and you're told you're crazy, you're simply being gaslit and gatekept if you're in a Western country. Where do elite talk about conspiracy theories, and where is it inappropriate? So, conspiracy is a factor of corruption. So if you say the government of Singapore or Japan is involved in a conspiracy with the American army and the, aliens of the planet Nibiru, and they're involved in some genocide and blah blah blah, well, you're probably paranoid schizophrenic, right? If you're all saying, well, the Japanese elite and the Singapore elite businessmen, they're involved in some gang, blah blah blah, you're jealous, right? So either you're jealous or paranoid schizophrenic. So if there is no corruption and you're inventing some conspiracy theory, either you're jealous or paranoid schizophrenic. So I don't support the term of calling someone crazy for a conspiracy theory, because that's gaslighting, right? We have to say either jealous or paranoid schizophrenic, right? And it's a medical diagnosis, right? So those are the only two explanations when corruption is low. However, when you have high corruption, everyone talks about the conspiracy, because it's not called conspiracy theory among elites, but intelligence gathering. For example, countries like Lebanon, where there is a lot of corruption and foreign assassination. So when affluent people talk about, oh, my best friend got assassinated, who did it so it doesn't happen to me, immediately they figure it out. Usually it used to be, the Assad family, because once the Assad family was gone, so were the assassinations. And, when Hezbollah's influence was diminished, assassinations were reduced, right? So people can figure it out, right? So when there is corruption, right, there is conspiracy. When there is no corruption, then conspiracy theorists are seen as dusty, low-value people who are simply jealous of elite. So, for example, in the West, it used to be a Christian, high-trust society where people could leave their doors unlocked in major cities, right? So whenever people would blame Jewish people, it's because broke, dusty losers didn't want to better themselves, they just wanted to be angry at people who were successful, and they would see a Jewish banker and someone who was a dusty loser who took more debt than they should have, instead of taking responsibility that they couldn't pay off that interest, of course they would blame the Jewish banker, right? So back in those days, it was a dusty behavior when the West was not corrupt and a high-trust society. So when people did not have to lock their homes, when people were inventing conspiracy theories, they were usually not true. For example, the CIA, when they wanted to hide all these autists and Aspies trying to figure out, that there was some weapons program that they were testing, they didn't want the Soviets to know about it from, some good-hearted, easily manipulated person on the spectrum to figure out what's up there. So they invented this theory that there was these aliens, conspiracy theory. It was, to create a decoy, but largely back in those days, the government was far more honest than it is today. There was far less corruption because corporations had far less power than they do today. So Russians have said that the difference between the United States and Russia is that both the United States and Russian media are like propaganda, but the Russians have the intelligence to not believe their news, and Americans are foolish enough to believe theirs. Which today is true, right? However, people have been transitioning from a high to low trust society, from a transparent to a corrupt society. During the time of the boomers, well, their parents were the great generation. The American society was religious, and religion formed a check on corporations, right? So they didn't have absolute power. Gay marriage was not all about gay people getting married. Corporations were pushing it, especially with LGBT propaganda, not because they cared about gay people, but because they were earlier pushing sex, illegal substances and rock and roll, free kitty, sexual revolution, etc., all to discredit religion so that corporations in the United States would have the last check on power removed so they could have absolute power. That's why. And, people were still going to church and they had to come up with something. So, and people wanted fairness back then. But you can't play fair and unfair well, but, back then people were still delusional. So they promoted this gay marriage, right? And this LGBT agenda, fairness, equality, and people are stupid to play fair and unfair. Well, I don't know why people want to play fair. Maybe, Christianity made people delusional about fairness. Probably that was it. Anyway. So, as a result, people started leaving the church, maybe to discover life was unfair. Maybe the church made it artificially fair within that church. I don't know, not all churches were fair. I don't know what was going on. I don't know why people were delusional and wanted fairness. I don't know. I don't mean to gaslight, but genuinely, I don't understand people who want to play fair in an unfair world. If you can help me know what's going on in that brain of theirs, I'm curious, I won't judge, I'm just shocked. Why would someone do that? It's like jumping off, if you don't want to unalive yourself, but saying, I'm a bird, I'll flap my wings, and jumping off a balcony of a 10-story building, right? 10-story penthouse balcony. Oh, I'm a bird. And then squat, and you're no longer alive. Well, because you think you're a bird, and you identify as a bird, and your pronouns are twee, right? And then you're no longer there, and your soul is tweeting with the birds. Alright? I would wonder what would drive someone to do that, right? So, to me, the same thing is playing fair in an unfair world. Like, why would you do that? If anyone knows, please write in the comments below, because I'm curious. So, people were manipulated by the gay marriage. Oh, it's unfair, therefore the church is unfair, we should leave the church. People were too foolish and sheepish in America, trusting the big corporations. I mean, I'm at loss of words at how dumb and lack of critical thinking people have. Maybe it's because the corporations removed critical thinking from schools in the United States, I'm guessing, right? If you are American and you have all those taxes, but you don't have healthcare, why should you trust corporations, right? If they have lobbyists that hold your politicians hostage, like, why on earth would you trust them, right? So let's look at Luigi and the Super Mario Brothers. Who did Luigi unalive, right? That healthcare CEO, he unalived 30% of the claims. So 30% of people who bought health insurance, when they got sick, they couldn't get healthcare. It's a scam, right? It's ridiculous. And usually it's if they have something, this is one of the reasons I left the United States. So I noticed my family friends when they got, cancer, when they would deny the claim, deny the claim, deny the claim. Third stage. When it's fourth stage, and they had to have lawyers, they had to, when they were so sick, they had to spend their money on lawyers. So when it was fourth stage and too late, only then, Blue Shield or whoever it was would pay them out. I don't remember exactly the company name, so, alright, I just named a name of an American company. It's not exactly that one, so. But like, American health insurance is a complete scam and fraud. So Americans have no health care unless you're affluent. Unless you're rich, you have no access to health care. When you're young, you don't understand what this is. It's when you're in your 50s, etc., that's when you actually have health issues. So for me, in a decade, that's when that would be, right? And you would not have access to a doctor, basically. So when it's serious, like, heart attack, cancer, anything that lets you in a hospital in the United States, basically you get $100,000 debt or so. People lose their home. It's ridiculous. Also, at the same time, the American-Israeli Political Action Committee gives $100 million a year to American politicians. And with this whole Epstein Island thing, they can't refuse endless wars for Israel. The Iraq War, for example, cost American taxpayers up to $3 trillion. So, right, how was the Iraq War in the interests of American taxpayers and the war in Afghanistan? It wasn't. Also, if America was not allies with Israel, there would have been no 9/11. 9/11 was simply a reaction to then Ariel Sharon threatening to blow up the Aqsa Mosque, which was the third holiest site in Islam. And this was egged on with George Bush, who was yeah. And if George Bush said, you know what, we're completely neutral, we have nothing to do with this, there would have been no 9/11, right? 3,000 Americans died in the Twin Towers because America is an ally of Israel. If America had been neutral on Ariel Sharon saying, we don't condone this, we don't condone what's going on, we have nothing to do with this, that's 3,000 Americans who'd still be alive today. But because America was not neutral towards Israel and picked that particular country to be their ally, Americans keep dying. A lot of red pill dusties say, what do you bring to the table for me to date you? Well, a better question is, what does Israel bring to the table for the American taxpayer to support their endless wars instead of having healthcare? I have always condemned October 7th, and I am not saying that Hamas are good people. I'm just saying that for the United States, what is the benefit of having Israel as an ally? That question should be asked openly and was asked by Charlie Kirk shortly before he was unalived, and he said because he was asking this question, he feared for his life, and then 1 month later, he's no longer there. Of course, this leads to conspiracy theories, right? Because there's so many coincidences. And also, I don't believe the shooter. I never believed the shooter. It's just technically impossible that it was Tyler Robinson or whatever student. It's not a leftist student. It's a professional assassin, alright? And my hobby used to be shooting. There is no way someone who is not a professional sniper did that. It's just technically impossible. And if you think that I should believe that a non-sniper, a non-professional who was angry at Charlie Kirk took his life, you're expecting me, you think I'm an idiot. I'm not an idiot. I know what happened. I know ornaments, right? So I don't know who did it, but I know for sure it was a professional, right? There is no way some angry student did it, because, and there's no way it was someone's first time and poof, okay? So my grandfather is a colonel, right? And he said the first time people unalive someone or try to in a war, right? Soldiers, they flinch. This is a human instinct. And, I've seen this as well, right? I've lived through war. People will flinch the first time. The other thing is when you are sniping, right? You need to be, that's why you have all this Tai Chi, Taekwondo, all this stuff, right? Before sniping, there were arrows, and to hit the arrow precisely, you have to time your breath, your heartbeat, so on, so forth, right? So it's your breathing, everything. You have to be a professional in order to hit like that. And also, the bullet, if it was some deer hunter, alright, if it was a deer hunter, then the bullet would have created a big hole, right? Because when hunting a deer, right? And would have gone out the back and injured someone else or unalived someone else, right? That's not the case. I don't know who ordered the professional hitman, right? But there is no way you would expect someone like me, who studied intelligence, national security, who worked for the parliament, who has, used to shoot as a hobby. You cannot expect someone like me to believe the official story of the government.
A professional operation. Now, I remember, and I've reported this many times, James Jesus Angleton, who was the chief of counterintelligence for the CIA, told me one day, I think it was in 1975, that it was when they were holding the church hearings on the CIA in Congress. He told me that when the CIA pulls off an operation, they already have a prepackaged story, and it's immediately released and therefore becomes the explanation before any other explanation can see the light of day. It's set in stone. It's the explanation. Everything else is a conspiracy theory. And he said, we realize that the explanation will have problems. It'll wear thin. And when it wears thin, like the Oswald shooting President Kennedy, we have several more prepackaged explanations. And then we release two of them. And then the people argue about which of those two is the correct. And they forget all about the fact if the first one was false, that these probably are two. And he says if this goes on long enough through time, the CIA itself doesn't know what happened.
However, I'm half Arab, half Eastern European. And I will tell you, oh, they're faking of how the West works. And you have all the time here, right? If you're on the spectrum, living in the West is maddening, but you need to do what you've got to do to get along with all those Karens, and be fake, right? So I'm going to just teach you how to be fake around Karens, right? And how to know how to treat Karen differently from your date. So here I'm talking about social strategy and how to move up and level up, right? So there is a difference with conspiracy in different countries. Where there is corruption, conspiracy is not even called conspiracy among elite, but intelligence gathering. And societies like Singapore or Japan, where there is no corruption or very little of it, a conspiracy means either you're envious or crazy. So in the West, it went from a high-trust society where people downtown in large metropolitan areas could live their homes unlocked. And now, it has become a high-crime society, highly corrupt, right? And so that no longer serves the electorate, especially in the United States, right? So corruption in the, in Eastern Europe, for example, is personalized, and in the West, it's proceduralized. In the West, it's actually even worse in the United States than Russia and Ukraine. But the difference is, in Russia or Ukraine, it's this oligarch or that person stole this, right? So, but in America, it's this committee with that shell company, under that shell company, under this other, who gave this NGO a donation to this senator, right, for the campaign, and nod, scratch my back and I scratch yours. However, under this system, far more corruption happens than corruption in third world countries actually happens in the United States. So the distance between the common person and the elite is bigger in the United States than either Russia or Ukraine. So my father worked in Yemen for the president. Did elite talk about conspiracy? Absolutely. They talked about, they would go to the Qatar tobacco market and then come back and then, come together and they say, or my driver came back from the tobacco market and this, and he told me, that everyone knows that your brother stole so much, and that even your brother was seeing escorts in Germany. Apparently everyone knows this. So our official story didn't work, we need a new one. So people actually said that, and back, the former dictator had this sense of humor and also told political jokes. And he even had this joke that he was known for telling jokes, and that the then dictator of Syria, who was infamous for just unaliving people for even looking the wrong way. So he was saying, I'm very well known for my jokes. Should I tell you this one about the thieves? And I collect all sorts of jokes about myself. They're so funny. You'll laugh, let me tell you. And then the Syrian president said, Syrian former dictator said, I also collect political jokes. I have 3 prisons full of them. So, it was, back in the day, people would just laugh and say, it's this thing, or maybe it's that one. But the way elite would talk about conspiracies in corrupt countries, right, corrupt developing countries, differs from the West. So it would be collecting intelligence, so there's a system starting with, this is highly likely. Actually, it's a 7-point system, and it starts with, this is so highly likely, 99% true, I think it's absolutely true. 99%. It goes from 99% to highly likely, right? And then the third is likely. Then neutral, I don't know, maybe not. Then it's unlikely, then highly unlikely, then are you crazy? That sounds ridiculous. So if you're talking to an Eastern European or Middle Eastern, a country that is on the corruption index, and you're talking to an intelligent person, and you say, do you think this kid could have, that the FBI officially says is the assassin, do you believe the conspiracy that the FBI says this is the assassin? Do you believe the official story? Ha 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 ha. No, of course no. No, this is highly unlikely. This is 99% not likely. You saw, if it's true, then they show bullet. And bullet match gun, no bullet, no story. That lying from the government. When does the government tell the truth? Huh? They big thief. When do they release Epstein files? Then I believe the government. Otherwise, the government, they big liar. Arab, when they release الفايل أبو إبستاين والله then I believe them. كيف يعني؟ شوف البولت، وين البولت؟ وين البلايين؟ وين البولت؟ وين؟ شفت البولت؟ You saw bullet? No, I didn't see bullet. Why they hide bullet? And then after assassination next day they hide Epstein list. حرام. يا لحوي, you expect me to be stupid? To be stupid sheep to believe in government? Yeah, ويلي. You think I'm an idiot? Yeah, haram. So, in countries where there is already corruption, they're not going to believe the official story, right? Because we're used to corruption back home, right? However, if you speak the way you would speak to someone in a country that has corruption, you speak this way to a Westerner, the naive Western fool will believe you're crazy because they're being gaslit by the media. To be fair, in the 1950s, the media was honest, at least somewhat, I don't know. But, we can argue with what the CIA did in Nicaragua and the Iran-Contra affair and the Cold War and what happened in Vietnam. We can argue, right? But still, it was a high-trust society, and the government did its best to work in the interests of their people. Today, it only works in the interest of corporations. It's highly corrupt. In Canada we had Justin Trudeau. Here is a great example. He was so corrupt that the Liberals had to remove him and bring in a person who had a clean record, Carney. So if people are talking conspiracy theories about Carney, that he did this and that, or he was not on the Epstein list, the only conspiracy I would believe is if there is any connection to Epstein, he might have been his accountant. But his personal life is clean as a whistle, which is why he was picked after Trudeau. However, Justin Trudeau fired the first female First Nations attorney of color, right? Why? Because his buddies from SNC Lavalin hired escorts for Gaddafi's sons to win a contract, and she wanted to arrest them for corruption, and instead Trudeau fired her so that he could reverse the verdict and allow them to be corrupt and have no consequences for their actions and let go. And the woman who supported her also got let go from her position in Parliament, and both of them got replaced by other Liberal members of Parliament. So, yes. Let's also talk about Trudeau, what was in the papers, right? His former roommate when he was a teacher at West Point Grey, also a fellow teacher and his best friend, was arrested for child porn. Yes, child pornography. Yes, that's why he was arrested, okay? And Justin Trudeau was mysteriously fired, the former Canadian Prime Minister, from his job in the middle of January, and he was accused of sleeping with a 15-year-old student by Buffalo Chronicle, which he didn't sue for defamation. He did not sue them. Buffalo Chronicle said there was some sort of an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, that was a few million with Justin Trudeau and this student. So these are not conspiracy theories, but actual news of what happened in Canada under the corruption. There's so much more, but I won't bore you about Canadian politics. point being, strange things happen when the government is corrupt. When the government is corrupt, first come the conspiracy theories, and then eventually some brave journalists usually print them, right? So is it a conspiracy theory if it's true, right? So in corrupt developing countries, as I said earlier, it's called intelligence gathering. So it depends on the country you're in. If you're in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, it's perfectly alright to discuss intelligence gathering, right? So if someone says, do you think Charlie Kirk was assassinated, or do you believe the FBI? You know, like, I would respond, why would I believe the FBI? Right? As soon as, you know, he was assassinated, right, they hid the Epstein files. So why should I believe them? I mean, honestly, they haven't given me a reason to trust them. I think they're corrupt. Why would any intelligent person trust a corrupt person? If they say who did it, I say, I don't know. Probably someone who has unalived people before. I don't know. Somebody who has sent assassins before. I don't know. I mean, look at Epstein, Virginia Giuffre. Probably one of those people who wanted to get the Epstein files out of the news and to distract MAGA. But I personally wouldn't know. Right? Again, that's if you're in Eastern Europe. That's if you're in a corrupt country in the Middle East. Now, in the West, it's so different because the West used to be a high-trust society where you used to be able to trust the FBI, to be honest. You no longer can. Most people don't know that. Most people are sheep. Most people don't think critically. Even if they have money, it's in poor form. You know, people will still say somebody is crazy, right? It's like so many people are saying Candace Owens is crazy. But having worked for the government, I have seen pretty much examples of everything she said add up here and there. So I don't necessarily agree with her. And I think because she was a black woman who was lynched by AIPAC, online lynched, and what happened to her was a lynching because she said the wrong words, right? She said, oh, we must treat Israel like Ukraine. And, you know, she was told that you're never pro-AIPAC enough. And her whole career she had to pretend that nothing was going on in Palestine and Palestine didn't exist, etc., etc. She had to be fake for so long, and she was never good enough. So they lynched her the moment she put her foot the wrong way, right? So, you know, as a result of being lynched, as a black woman for being black, yes, that's why they did it, because if she were white, she would know the social rules that you cannot talk about Mrs. Macron, you cannot talk about what happens in people's bedrooms. You know, Shapiro did not explain this to her, right? Because, you know, with working class, people are straightforward. But in the elite, you don't talk about what goes on in people's bedrooms unless this person is burning down the country like Justin Trudeau. Whereas Macron, it's not, you know, it's not Kamala Harris, right? So, therefore, it's not the business of Americans, right? Therefore, we don't talk about it. But, of course, Ben Shapiro could not explain the unwritten rules because she had to be born white to know them, right? And then the next thing is he would talk about free speech, but when it came to the Israel lobby, he had to be a hypocrite and had to, oh no, we can't talk about it. He should explain and say, you know what, Candace, I understand you want to say this, however. So, Ben Shapiro, what he should have told Candace is to say, you know what, you know, you do have to apologize on air, you cannot say these things and stay with our organization. Because we get money from APAC, or American Israel Political Action Committee. You know, you're working for a Jewish employer. He would say he's pro-Israel, and he needs to feed his family. He has a family, he has kids, and that's how this business works. That in exchange for being pro-Israel, you have a massive platform. All right? Now, if you don't want to be pro-Israel, you can start your own platform. Right? You know, I like you, I'm sorry, but free speech is an illusion, right? It's BS. And that's the unwritten rule of the society. Free speech is only free on some occasions, but it's actually BS. There is no really rule. It's free as long as you don't criticize those in power, so it's not really free speech. Unless you're going on your own and you will battle on your own for real free speech, that's what you do on your own. But it's performative freedom if you want a big salary and a big platform. With big platforms comes lying and corporatees. If you want honesty, you have to go on your own. But if you want funding and a big platform, then you have to do the corporate BS. And I need to feed my family, and then other people who work with me, they all need to feed their families. So if you're working for corporate, you have to do the corporate BS and the schmoozing and, you know, the butt licking, right? That's just how working for corporate works. Or you can work on your own if you want honesty and real freedom. You can't just like autist around, right? And work for a corporation. If you have autism, work for yourself. Corporate America is an autist exclusionary zone. If you're working for a white collar American corporation and being an autist, it's not compatible. Sorry. Go work as a manicurist and find a pink collar job, or as an electrician and find a blue collar job. Is what it is. Or you start your own podcast, darling. So, of course, white, both Anglo-Saxon and Ashkenazi Jewish Americans who are educated and white collar are taught these things, these unwritten rules from their parents, right? Who work in corporate and all those things, right? But working class people are taught directness because it's important for safety, right? Because if you have all these unwritten rules and if a construction site, workers would die, right? So, of course, they need to have, the rules written for the blue-collar working class. But for white-collar, most of it in North America is unwritten rules. So, essentially, Candace Owens was punished for being black and working class and lynched for being black by Ashkenazi white American Jewish lobbyists. That's what literally happened, right? And that's why Candace Owens is not pro-Israel. If you say she's a Semite hater, you're just blaming the victim. She was just lynched by a mob, and she does not have a particular liking for the organized group of people who lynched her. And yes, it was an organized group that included many organizations that represented a particular ethnicity, that accused her of not liking that ethnicity. But if let's say all the Armenian organizations suddenly try to prevent me from earning a living, libel me, slander me, gaslight me, call me crazy, and all the Armenians do that because I say one wrong word about, the Armenian. Let's say the wrong word about Kim Kardashian, they all go after me, right? Would I like Armenians? Probably not. Well, thankfully, all the Armenians I have encountered were such wonderful people. I've learned so much from them. They are absolutely amazing. And so, they don't. But had that happened, I would not have a favorable opinion, naturally, right? Or let's say, if you say something wrong about Arabs and they all go after you, you will not like us, right? So I don't think Candace Owens is an anti-Semite. However, I do find sometimes because she was lynched by APAC, sometimes she goes too far, alright? And it's understandable, because if people lynch a black woman online, she's not going to like them. I'm sorry. That's just how that works. Does it mean she's crazy? No, right? And if you say she's crazy, you're a flying monkey, you're a gaslighter, right? Then what are you worth in a friendship with other women, right? For some silly low-value woman who idolizes Meghan Markle was saying, oh, Candace Owens should stop embarrassing herself. Lady, you have a job. You should stop embarrassing yourself, quit your job, and find a sugar daddy, alright? You know, Candace Owens is literally doing her job, right? As a journalist, and as a working class woman, she would know the unwritten rules. As a black working class woman, she would know the rules that you cannot talk about what happens in people's bedrooms, like with Brigitte Macron. That's not appropriate, right? Because then you'll be ostracized from high society, right? And it was her employer's duty to tell her that's the unwritten rules, right? That's Ben Shapiro's fault. Right, he's embarrassing himself by not explaining this to her and not explaining to her what the unwritten rules in white society are. That was his fault, alright? So I do think Candace Owens is on the spectrum because her behavior and demeanor is consistent with it. And with people on the spectrum, you do have to tell them why the social rules exist. It's very rare you have someone like myself who's sitting there and learning the unwritten social rules to get ahead, right? Most of the time it will be there will be someone you'll have to explain to them what the social rules are. Because if it's not some gold digger, right, who's thinking, okay, how do I get the best gentleman, then I have to learn the social skills, right? If you have a career lady, she's going to think about her job and how to be good at her job. And that's when you show studies of unwritten rules that it's not about doing a good job. That's just a working class pack donkey thing to get exploited, alright? You should know the office politics, alright? It's who you know and how you conduct yourself, not what you know, that gets you ahead. Meghan Markle was a fairly intelligent lady, but she lost her sparkle because she didn't know how to navigate the royal family. You can say, yeah, you know what, they're racist, or they're this, or they're that. Like, there's a lot coming about how the Queen protected Prince Andrew. And I think what might have happened is she threw Meghan Markle under the bus to protect her dear Prince Andrew, that she spoiled rotten until he rotted since childhood, alright? So there is this story that's perhaps what happened. You know, at the same time, airing her dirty laundry in public was not right for Meghan Markle, and that's how she got hurt, alright? So Meghan Markle was not stoic and strategic. She did the right thing in leaving the royal family, and if you want, I can do comment below. I can make videos on Meghan Markle and her strategy. So she actually did a few things right, and the royal family did do a few things wrong, but she also made some mistakes as well that we can learn from, because there were some elite social rules she broke, but then there were some, she played her cards, you know, well, considering the situation, but there are things she could have improved, right? And, you know, like, I do admire her success, and I think she was smart to leave the royal family instead of being used like a pack donkey until she got cancer, like Princess Catherine. So she was smart to leave the royal family, but she also got in trouble for breaking some social rules. As far as the Macron story, I don't think it's as far-fetched as people are saying, because a lot of things about Justin Trudeau have been uncovered. You can Google them, right? And also the French journalists, so it's not that Candace Owens made it up. She's following a couple French journalists who first spotted the story. Macron's tried to sue them, in court, and they lost. They appealed, and they lost again. Would I recommend, as an elegant lady, you pursue an actual serious career in journalism? Absolutely not. Right? Instead, the best thing is to pursue fake journalism, like sports journalism, like Lauren Sanchez, right? Oh, you're so cute. That type of stuff, right? Not actual serious work. I don't think serious work is something for elegant ladies to do. I don't believe that careers are elegant for ladies at all. Because if you want a serious career, what happens? If you want to get to the top with your career, look what happened at Candace Owens. And all these women, right? Why? Why is Candace Owens at the bottom of the female social dominance hierarchy, but at the top of the male one because of competence and bravery? Because what reward did Candace Owens get out of her career? A husband that people accuse of being down low homo, right? Not much of a reward. Do you see her husband protect her the way Donald protects Melania? Don't. I know it might be controversial, but I don't believe career is a proper way for intelligent, feminine ladies to level up, or for intelligent women to level up. Because, in career, if you're going to be at the top, right, that means somebody else has to be below you, right? That means you have to take someone's place. There'll be a fight. So you will have to fight. It'll be ugly, it'll be dirty. Do you want that? Then you'll be accused of being crazy and embarrassing for just doing your job the same way gentlemen do their job. Candace Owens is simply doing her job as a journalist. Very often, she says things I don't agree with. I don't agree with all journalists. But, it's so sad when women are saying, oh, this woman is embarrassing because she's doing her job by her job description. And how many of you made your own money without the help of a gentleman? Candace Owens made her own money via her career, right? Something most of her haters have not made millions on their own. But I do think Candace Owens shows the price of what happens if you level up through your career. The pushback women encounter on their way to the top, right? All of a sudden, if you get to the top, you will have a clash with power, because you will want power. To get to the top, you will want power, because power prints money, money prints power, etc., etc. You will want to be the top dog. Well, there are other top dogs sitting there, perhaps who are not doing their job, and that's why you find an opening to take their place. They will fight back, right? So when people say, oh, women should make their own money. Okay, Candace Owens is making her own money, right? What's happening to her? Is this an enviable position? Is this a position most women want in life on top of the stress of raising children? Or does a stay-at-home mother sound much more appealing than the life of Candace Owens? I'd take stay-at-home mother over that. I'm sorry. I like Melania's pre-White House soft life. But my husband instead of Donald. Well, you know what? That's what I pretty much have, right? Candace Owens is not embarrassing. Society is. And the lies that society tells women. Candace Owens is simply hated for being a woman of color, working in a masculine job, having ambitions to power like any gentleman. This is gender equality. And the reason women rightfully have such a disgust reaction to her is because this gender equality doesn't work for us ladies. And this lie that being a trad wife, you're some sort of a slave, it doesn't work. I have a wonderful, soft life. I enjoy my life. My life is relaxing. Candace Owens doesn't. So I used to work in a similar field and I won a lot of awards. And I have to say that I accomplished nothing and the stress wasn't worth it. As much as I won a CNN Agent of Change award and quite a few other awards, I was very brave and, I didn't get much out of it. I used to believe in social justice, but then I realized the hard way I was too small to make a social change, so I was spending all this time getting stressed out, and the world stayed the same and even worse, and I had absolutely no impact whatsoever except in burning bridges and ruining my life. So if I decided to become selfish, stop helping others, and pour into myself first, and my life became better. So what is conspiracy theory etiquette? So we see Tucker saying something like this.
Bibi's running around, this is a fact, I'm not guessing about this, because I talked to people he said it to, is running around the Middle East, his region, and his own country, and telling people, point blank, just stating it, I control the United States, I control Donald Trump. He's saying that, and again, I'm not guessing at all. That's a fact, and I dare them to say that's not true, because it is true, and they know it's true. So I'm an American. How do you think it makes me feel? Even if I didn't vote for Trump, which I did vote, I campaigned for Trump, but even if it was Joe Biden, I'm an American. You can't treat, it's too humiliating. I can't handle that. And I shouldn't have to put up with that. This is a country of 9 million people. I'm not even attacking the country. I'm attacking my leaders who are allowing my nation of 350 million people to be forced into doing things that are bad for me and my children because of some other country. Like, that is a violation of the most basic arrangement we have with our leaders, which is represent us, please, at least most of the time, and they're not. And there's an ongoing humiliation ritual designed to make us all crazy, designed to turn us into haters. I'm not gonna give them the satisfaction of becoming what they call me. I'm not a hater, and I'm never gonna become one. But I will never accept this. I shouldn't have to accept it. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I have no unexpressed views. I'm not hiding anything. I say exactly what I think all the time. This is wrong. And if it's not wrong, tell me how it's not wrong. Why don't you stop attacking me and my trying to get family members fired, which they never stop doing? Why don't you instead tell me how you disagree with me? But they can't, because they don't actually have an argument. There's no way to justify controlling the U.S. government for the purposes of another country's, whatever their plan is, expansion. There's no way to justify that. And so they just scream at you and call you names. And I guess I'm just blessed because I don't believe that about myself, so that doesn't hurt me.
So in a Western country, what is the etiquette? I mean, we saw what Tucker said. So what is the etiquette about this? Well, you don't say anything, right? Because the society and the power is transitioning. See, the Israel lobby used to be all-powerful, and now because of Netanyahu's arrogance, it's losing its power. And Charlie Kirk talked about this before he was unalived and said that, of course, he was nervous, right? So, of course, when discussing the lobby and saying, hey, Netanyahu's arrogant, it's gone too far, right? If you say this, they'll gaslight you as anti-Semitic. And why it's gaslighting? Because anti-Semitism referred to before there was a state of Israel, when, the Jewish people were weak, right? When people were saying that, there's this Elders of Zion, it was a conspiracy theory. There was no AIPAC back then. And also when AIPAC started, it's like when Bank of America used to be Bank of Italy, right? It was, a credit union sort of for Italian Americans and this sort of a thing. It wasn't that Italian Americans were controlling the United States, right? Even though they had a bank, etc. So it's the same thing when there were small immigrants, right? When there were or saying that Muslims do this, or there are Muslim invasions, Muslims do this and this, right? Muslim immigration has really no power, right? So when you're saying someone weak is doing something, this is what people mean by conspiracy, right? This is what people say, okay, that's rude. So the Jewish community has gone from being small to the point that they leveled up by contributing so much to art, science, opera, history, and they leveled up into power. And Netanyahu wielded that power incorrectly, with arrogance instead of humility, noblesse oblige, playing by the rules of power, intelligence, and so on, right? So he just, took advantage of his good luck, right? And he overplayed his hand, and now he's in trouble. So, of course, the power dynamics and power balance shifts, right? And as a lady, like, what do you do, right? Because on a date, you're on a date, we'll discuss politics. When you're in society events, you will hear these things. What do? You say, I don't have an opinion, right? Literally that. So you know what? Play dumb. Because in this case, being dumb is smart. Saying, you know what? I don't know. Alright? So do not post about conspiracy theories in your social media if you live in a Western country or work with Westerners. Because, the society hasn't adapted to corruption yet, right? So, how does corruption work, right? Civilization starts with a muqaddimah, or introduction to history. It's best summarized by a French gentleman said, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. Well, furthermore, Ibn Khaldun wrote in the Muqaddimah, society starts with the barbarian invasions, or a group of barbarians. They have a simple social code. They don't have any unwritten rules. Autistic paradise, basically. He wrote this in 1300 AD, but yeah, the rules are clear. Okay, they have clear, few social rules, they're austere, and they follow those camp rules. Everyone follows those rules, and they follow them, okay? And they follow these rules. They're transparent, opposite of corrupt, right? And then, because of their power, basically they have clear rules, they're simple people with clear rules, and they have force, and with force they manage to get stability and peace. Peace leads to prosperity and trade, right? And then trade and prosperity leads to the complexity of civilization. So let's say you have people, they start with Al-Qaeda, right? Or something like this. Okay, or Taliban. Eventually, and they conquer because there's chaos and corruption everywhere, and they conquer the other neighboring people, right? But then they have wives, and their wives, well, they want this, they want that, their daughter wants Chanel, she sees things on TikTok, and like these men, they have wives, they have daughters, and even if they're austere, okay, then they pass, then the next generation, well, that marry their granddaughter, right? So their grandsons marry the granddaughters, and then, those girls they want nice things, and so on. Nice things require trade, you have civilizational complexity via trade. And then it becomes very, very complicated. And eventually, you have degeneracy. So there'll be unwritten rules, there'll be fakery, people will say one thing, and then they'll do the opposite, autistic hell, right? So, they'll say one thing, do the opposite, and there'll be corruption, and people start stealing things, So Lehman Brothers and all this subprime mortgage scandal, right before the corporate language they had was very, obtuse, lots of jargon, very unclear, and they had the most unwritten rules because they had the most corruption. So, for example, the Orthodox Church in the Middle East, there was a conflict with the Nestorians, which what they call the Nestorian heresy, and was a lot of conflict over things that were so complicated locals did not understand. And then the Prophet Muhammad brought Islam, which was much more simplified set of rules and complicated this over sophisticated, over bloated, corrupt, dying civilizations. So in the civilizational cycle, the West is decaying, degenerate, it's at the dying point, right? Because it had its peak probably in the 90s or 80s with the supermodels and all of this. That era, 90s and 80s, was peak Western civilization, right? That your parents, grandparents experienced, and today we're experiencing the decline. And why? It's because it became over sophisticated. In the 1980s, you would probably believe your government. Reagan was not corrupt the way Trump is, right? And corporations back then were much more honest. Because back then the church managed to have a check on the corporations and it created a balance. But after gay marriage completely discredited what remained of the church, right? Corporations have absolute power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, therefore you can trust them. So let's talk about these barbarian invasions, right? So if the society becomes so over-bloated, so corrupt that you need to get to the top, there's no level up anymore. For gentlemen, it has to be nepotism. Ladies can't work their way up, they must sleep their way up, etc., right? You know, for gentlemen, when they find, oh, if they start a gang and kick over the apple cart, it's much easier for them to level up this way by breaking the rules and not playing fair in an unfair world, right? Than it is to follow the rules. Then that's when you start to have the barbarian invasions, right? They find that they benefit more from uniting and kicking over the old system than they will benefit playing by the rules. That is when the old system starts to get overthrown. Candace Owens discovered it by being black, likely autistic, working class woman by accident, right? Because she didn't know what the unwritten rules were. And then she's not crazy, because you do not get to the top that so far make millions by being emotionally dysregulated, right? She simply had to mask being autistic. She had to mask and mask and mask and mask and mask. And then she slipped at one point, didn't realize there was this one unwritten rule from the millions of unwritten rules she had to figure out, that we in the corrupt West, we have to figure out everything. And then it's never enough. And then she was like, frig this, I'm overthrowing the apple cart. It's too complicated, it's too over sophisticated, it's like the fall of Rome. It's because the bureaucracy got too complicated, right? And it was easier for people to level up via barbarian invasions than level up by following the rules. That's how a lot of these civilizations fall. They fall from within, that people don't want to uphold the system that they find gives them no benefit anymore. So Candace Owens said the wrong thing by accident, just like Jordan Peterson. He said that, he's not going to use those pronouns because it's compelled speech. And then he got lynched. He was shocked. What on earth, right? And unlike others who had an online lynch mob going after them and apologized and got eaten by the mob, Jordan Peterson stood up to the mob and said, no, So he went to Russia for help, the right-wing Zionist lobby, whoever he could, to try to stand up. But this became a role model for Candace Owens, and here she just stood up for herself. Of course, she lost her job, but then, to her surprise, by kicking over the apple cart, she got so much support. In fact, she became the dominant alpha male of the alternative right. You know, to the point Nick Fuentes now, he's like, who, you know, reads the extreme right, he's saying insult after insult, because basically now the leader of the incels, oddly enough, is Candace Owens. But, so she ended up being at the top of the masculine hierarchy for bravery. By accident, by just like, this system doesn't work. I'm not getting anything out of it. So I will not play by the rules, I'll do the exact opposite and see where that gets me. And it ended up getting her somewhere. I'm not saying you should do this, but then again, I profile people like Lauren Sanchez. I'm not saying that you should go and sleep around with married gentlemen either, right? But we can all learn from these people. We can all learn from people who leveled up unconventionally and not clutch our pearls like Anna Bay, ooh, Lauren Sanchez, and then fangirl them later when they're successful. Candace Owens lucked out that her breaking the social rules worked out for her in her favor far more than it did for Meghan Markle, right? And the two working class women of color who didn't know the social rules and thus got into a lot of trouble, and I've been in their shoes and I know how much that hurts, so that's why I'm teaching you ladies. In Candace Owens' case, overthrowing the apple cart because F it, it's not working, benefited her because she represented the majority of working class males, and there was a big constituency that said, you know what, that's exactly how we feel. So she gave a voice to the millions of voiceless people who were tired. Whereas Meghan Markle's complaints with the royal family really didn't land the way she thought it would, because at that time people don't have a complaint. Now, with all the information of the British Queen protecting Prince Andrew, in spite of the whole Epstein thing, now would have actually been a good time if she had kept quiet all this time, and then this Epstein information coming out and saying, hey, this is why we left, because I felt they were throwing me under the bus, nitpicking on my nails, that I don't dress right, that every time I make the slightest mistake, and I'm trying so hard to follow protocol, every tiny mistake, the British press would write pages and pages, and I was the entertainment and the circus clown, and I just had enough of them focusing on that when there were allegations about Prince Andrew. So that's why, you know, I left. If she had kept quiet and waited for the story and said that, okay, this would be powerful. Because, you know, if you say things with the populist sentiment, right, this would work, right? Meghan Markle did the absolutely right thing to leave the royal family, because she'd be an unpaid pack donkey, expected to do all this work, all this labor, and then all the money belongs to not even her husband, but to her in-laws. They expect her to do all this work for free, like Princess Catherine, and Princess Catherine got abdominal cancer from all the stress. Like, why would Meghan Markle do that? She was smart to leave. How she left could have been better, but she did the right thing by putting herself first. And she lives a much happier life than had she been stuck doing all this unpaid labor and expected to be a nice pick-me. That's not her. Candace Owens took a gamble and threw over the apple cart and changed the power dynamics in the United States, and that had a ripple effect and changed power dynamics around the world. She stood up and said, no, I won't be bullied. Voila. So personally, I wouldn't trust anything that comes from a government of a country that has this unwritten rules. If everything is like unwritten rules, it's corrupt, okay? If they're not straightforward, if the social rules are not written down, but if you break, they say, oh, there are no rules, but if you break an unwritten rule, you get in trouble. Then that place is corrupt. Then I wouldn't believe the government of that place. So, for example, right, in Saudi Arabia, they'll tell you to not eat with your left hand. So in America, they should tell you that it's against the law to criticize Israel. They shouldn't be lying to you about the First Amendment. They should say there is no First Amendment. The amendment to the First Amendment is it applies unless you're criticizing Israel, right? You have free speech unless you criticize Israel. This is the American law. If people were open about it, then I would trust the American government to not lie to me, right? But if there are too many unwritten rules in the society, this is called corruption. Therefore, you cannot trust the government. Has the government released the Epstein files? Of course not. So in this case, right? So I've been asked, so how do we talk about these things? Well, in a way, you don't if you're around white North American or European people, especially if they're naive and they believe, there's no corruption, because back in the day there wasn't. In my parents' generation, when my parents were young, the West was not corrupt the way it is today, right? And a person could, working hard, have a good life in the West, right? If they work hard and play by the rules, it was fair enough that they could get somewhere. Today we hear don't play fair in an unfair world. That's every young Gen Z person probably heard this phrase, right? Shira said it, but everyone has heard it and makes sense. But in the days of when the boomers were young, you could get ahead by playing fair. That's why people invested in that system, and it used to work. So of course, when you could get ahead by playing fair, at that time the conspiracy theories were lies, because the society was not corrupt. And when the society becomes corrupt, right, you can't play fair because the corrupt society is unfair, right? You can no longer win by playing by the rules. So you can no longer trust that society, okay? You can no longer trust the government. So the government in that society, everything they say is a political pretext, and the truth is something different, right? And even you will have people like Canadian boob job Karen, right? You will have luxury beliefs. You'll have people who say one thing, how to level up, and do the opposite. You'll see lots of people being fake and playing games, right? So you also have to learn to play the game. So you would say, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. I know nothing. Play dumb. So your date, let's say, oh, do you think, it's really that kid who unalived Charlie Kirk? Say, I'm a girl. What would I know? And change the bloody subject and say, what? I prefer to talk about art, right? What's the last philosophy book? Let's talk about Aristotle. Oh, that Kirk stuff is so boring. I don't have time for this. Let's talk about something interesting. Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy. You don't win, right, if you talk about it. So if you do say what you think, and it's intelligent, if you see something intelligent, well, then you're crazy. in the Western society, you'll be gaslit. How dare you think on your own? How dare you have critical thinking? You're crazy. Or, ooh, you're too intelligent. And then he'll think, oh, that girl, she's smart. I will have to level up my game if I play her. So you just, no, right? Or, if you say what you think and you repeat what everyone says, then you're a dumb sheep, and he'll think, oh, what a dumb sheep, let me take advantage, right? So no matter what you say, when it comes to conspiracies, talking about them is not in your favor, all right? So you can talk about them to close friends, you can talk about them to your spouse, right? But I would not recommend posting your true thoughts on social media. I mean, you can send voice messages to your friends, right? The most important power dynamics, though, that I see is there's a shift from America being Zionist into Netanyahu overplaying his cards and America going towards anti-Zionism. And also Netanyahu alienated a lot of the world, Middle East and Europe, and before they were on his side. So what I see as a former political analyst is the tectonic plates are shifting in politics. So Israel's position is shifting in terms of its alliances and everything like this, and its power. Don't get caught in the middle of that. Just wait for the dust to settle and see where the chips lie and where the power dynamic changes, who wins and loses. And then, once we have a clear understanding of the new hierarchy, then you know who to suck up to. So right now, the tectonic plates are shifting, and there's a change of power dynamics. Before, the American Israel lobby had almost absolute power, especially if you look at the 90s. There was no internet, there were only a few people, and they added so much value, the Israel lobbyists. So they managed to influence the few people at the top. And now, with the internet, you can't influence all the podcasters. It went from a couple gatekeepers to thousands of people, and they cannot fight the entire internet. And they were too arrogant. Instead of telling their own story, before what they used to do is censor, and use their influence to censor. And now they're trying to censor the internet, and if you do that, you'll have a backlash. So they were censoring the internet and being too arrogant, thinking it's the 90s, instead of adapting for the modern era by telling their story, right? And since Netanyahu, when he found out, oh, he is losing the younger generation, so, instead of apologizing or whatever, he was just simply, oh, I have something on Trump. Let's see how far we can go, and let's go crazy. And alienate everyone. I don't know what he's up to these days. But then he just went wild when Trump got in power. So, as a result, he just alienated everyone, right? And he's clinging on to power. Most Israelis don't even like Netanyahu, so it's Netanyahu and Likud, it's not all Israel, right? And Netanyahu, according to Charlie Kirk, was just really bullying Trump. And he just had enough of this arrogant behavior. And then he's gone, right? And we saw what Tucker Carlson said, right? So now the power dynamics are completely shifting in the United States. So while this is happening, I don't recommend that you support Israel or support Palestine. Just act dumb and wait for it to shift, right? Because when things are shifting, if you are on one team, the other team won't forgive you, and then if you're on the other team, the other team won't forgive you. And as a woman, we do not support this team or that team. We support our self-interest, so we have to wait for the dynamics to shift. We have to wait to see who's the winner, and then we support the winner. So, just keep quiet, play dumb, lay low, wait and see who's the winner, and then support the winner. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. It's gentlemen's job to fight wars, and it's ladies' job to reward the winner. Because history is written by victors. Therefore, in times of change, don't publicly repeat conspiracy, especially if you have a job, right? If you have a job and you're writing what you think from your good heart, it can be used against you, right? So the less you say as there is a change of guard in the elites, the better. Alright, just wait for the tectonic plates to settle. Wait for the dust to settle and for the hierarchy to settle and the new hierarchy to arrive, right? Then you can figure out who you should schmooze to and suck up to. Until then, don't say anything on a public platform and wait for the dust to settle, especially if you're not established and you're dating up or moving up ahead in your career. Please like or hate, share and subscribe and comment below. Thank you.